We've got a great ACL update coming up for you this week, but as we were working it through in editing, we realised after the fact that we hadn't done a great job introducing our guest speaker for this week. So let me do that now. Former Qantas Captain Graham Hood has done a fair bit of work on television lately. He's been at the forefront of the Convoy to Canberra. He was with a delegation at Parliament House presenting some requests or some demands. And we just thought he'd make a fascinating interview, which he did. He's a sincere Christian, and from the get-go, he's really impressed me as somebody who has been really wanting to put Jesus front and centre in his life, but at the same time has become a de facto spokesman for people, some of whom he agrees with, some of whom he maybe slightly agrees with, and some of whom he might be embarrassed to be associated with. The freedom movement, as it currently stands, is a very diverse group, and Graham has had to negotiate that along with his wife Michelle as a sincere Christian seeking after God, wanting to serve Jesus with his whole heart. He's a Seventh-day Adventist. He's a fascinating man. He's a very down-to-earth Australian, and I'm just so impressed with his determination to just keep bringing everything back to Jesus. He's been on the platform with the microphone in hand in Canberra at every turn, praying for people, at every turn wanting to baptise people and lead them to Jesus. And yet, the public has wanted something different from him as a spokesman for a movement that he doesn't necessarily fully understand, fully want to be associated with. But he's been doing his best to navigate through that. So it's a very interesting interview. You may not agree with everything he says. Most people don't agree with everything anybody else says. But we really wanted to bring this to you just to honour Graham's faith, his sincerity, this moment in history for him, this moment in history for Australia. Hope you enjoy it. Good evening and welcome to another ACL update number 8. My name's Alister. I'm one of the National Directors at the Australian Christian Lobby, and I'm with Wendy Francis, another National Director of politics this time. And we come to you every week with a summary of the news of the week. This week's a little bit special. We're going to be really quick about the summary because we've got a special guest that we're about to introduce. But Wendy, it has been a big week. There's been a lot going on. Maybe we can just punch through a few headlines in the interests of time.
Yeah, and every guest that we have on here is special, but you're right, it's extra special today. So make sure that you read your e-news, everybody, that you get in your email, because we've got a lot going on. We've got New South Wales, the euthanasia legislation will be tabled this week. So really we're at the pointy end. Really pray about that. We've got Mark Latham's, he's putting a bill forward for parental rights. You'll hear more about that, but look on the email. We've got 3.5 weeks to go until the South Australian election. So it's coming out really quick. savotes.org.au, have a look at that. Now, something that has come up just last week, Alister, is the whole push on consent education. And now this is going to be a mandated curriculum, national, and we are going to speak out on this because it's so important that we don't forsake parental rights. So we want parents to have consent before the kids get taught consent education.
And the devil, Wendy's in the detail here, isn't it? Like, what does it mean to teach consent to a foundation class of 5.5, 6-year-old kids? I'll be very interested to find out more about that.
Absolutely. And just the last thing I would touch on is that in Victoria, and we know a lot of stuff comes out of Victoria, but Fiona Patten is tabling a bill this week to decriminalise drugs in that state. So we're also speaking out on that. So I'd encourage everybody to catch up on those news things around the nation. That's just a really quick snippet. But yeah, I'm excited to go forward in this time with you because we have got a very special person.
We do. And that whole Fiona Patten thing, that's a vexing question. It's always a challenge. Are we talking about a medical issue? Are we talking about a legal issue? And I believe it's also coming up in the ACT, that same question. But yes, with no further ado, we're really excited to have former Captain Graham Hood with us, someone who barely needs an introduction. But Graham, welcome to ACL Update. Thank you for taking some time off. I believe you've had your leg up for a little bit post-operation. Your dear wife, Michelle, has had her shoulder back from an operation. So there's a bit of recovery going on in your household. But thanks for giving us some time today.
Yeah, thank you, Alister and Wendy. Great to see you both. And yeah, we're a couple of old crocs at the moment. I reckon we can pull enough parts together to make one decent human being out of us. So it's a function of what goes with the grey hair and the old age. But yeah, it's great to be with you.
It's great to have you. Now, Graham, I just want to start here. In one of the last video updates that you put out, you mentioned that you had sort of been thrust into the spearhead position of, quote unquote, the freedom movement. But in recent days, you've really wanted, I think you've been expressing a distancing from that. You've actually described the freedom movement as a brood of vipers. That's strong language. And you've sort of felt the need to step back. You've talked about wanting to be part of a freedom community, but not a freedom movement. So let's just start there. Can you just tease out what's that all about?
Well, as you said, I was sort of thrust into the limelight as a result of the video that I made, and I realised that that video represented the heartfelt voices of hundreds of thousands of people that were asking me to keep going. So I started speaking at a few rallies. And that was great. And then all of a sudden, when the Canberra Convoy happened, it concentrated everybody from the freedom movement into one spot for a prolonged period of time. And they were all in one campground and all that sort of stuff. And it became obvious that there are so many different agendas in the freedom movement itself that have been there for a long time. People have been involved in the freedom movement for 30 plus years, and they're fighting battles still that they started 30 plus years ago. And as someone who was being asked to articulate some of the reasons that we were in Canberra, it became important for me to understand why a lot of people were there. And it became such a disparate group of, we're here for this, we're here for that. And I've been getting up on stage and have people grab me and say, you've got to talk about this, you mustn't mention this, don't mention God, don't pray. And it became a tug of war, and I felt like the rope in the middle of it. And in any movement there are egos, and there are different dispositions about why they're there, and it just became more consuming than the reason I was there in the first place. And what I realised moving around the people in the camp was they were all of one accord. They were all in love with the idea of this new community, which is what I started to resonate when I started speaking out. I wanted us to be a resilient Australian community, united in faith, obviously, for me. That doesn't sit with a lot of other people, but for me, that's my reason. And to come back to an Australia that was something that we could associate with maybe in the 40s and 50s, where times were tough and everybody looked out for each other, and we've become really selfish and self-orientated. So in order to stay on my message, and stay on the message, I believe that was that of thousands of people who were following me, I had to say, I want to be part of the community, but not the movement. I want to be part of the club without being on the board. Does that make sense? Because it's like church boards and and other corporate boards. There's always infighting going on, and I found it really distracting. And it got me to a point after several quite heated comments with various people that I was better off just speaking for the community that I believe are largely there, and that is the people between the right wing trench and the left wing trench that are getting caught in the crossfire between the two wings. And that middle ground, that no man's land, if you like, is occupied by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Australians who don't care about all that stuff. They just want to get on with their lives. They want to get their country singing again. They want to get their people happy again. They want to have a reason to wake up in the morning instead of waking up in this horrible cloud we've had for 2 years. So yeah, I have no angst with the freedom movement. I think it has been generated because people have lost faith in government. People have lost faith in organisations and institutions. And when you get a lot of angry people together in one place, all these different things pop up. So I have to focus on why I'm there and why I think the people who follow me want me to be there, and keep doing that to the best of my ability. So I want to be in the community rather than on the board.
Graham, can you articulate for us clearly why you are there? Why did you go there in the first place? What is your message?
Right. I started seeing something going wrong a few years ago. I became a Christian 15 years ago, from atheism to Christ in 0 to 100 in seconds. It was at a time when I was going to kill myself. I'd completely been lost in my pornography addiction, and I didn't have any reason to be. And my marriage was over, and I met Michelle, and that turned my life around, and I could see a purpose in Christ. I started to live into that because we had on our hearts to work with the adult victims of childhood sexual abuse who would come out in later life to help restore their lives. And I saw a lot of pain in people. And I started to see our country in decline. Believe it or not, when Coles and Woolies were charging $1 a litre for milk at the expense of the dairy farmers, and we all rubbed our hands together with glee. Oh, free milk, we'll pay $5 for a coffee, but $1 a litre for milk. So I desperately wanted us to go back to the Australia that I grew up in, which was a much more community-orientated Australia, where Christian values were taught, and they were a blessing on people by and large. So going to Canberra, my original idea of going to Canberra was I've got a radio show myself, and I was looking for truck drivers to interview to find out their plight, because I'd just done a series with nurses. And then in the research, I found out somebody had just launched a convoy to Canberra. So I tried to find out who was running that. It was a bit hard to get in touch with whoever it was. And in the research, I realised that it was happening within days. And I thought, well, I just said on Facebook, I think I'll go for a drive to Canberra and see the truck show. I just wanted to go, just Michelle and I. We didn't expect a following. But the minute we said that on Facebook, it went nuts. Everybody says we're going to Canberra. So the reason I went there, my prime mission in Canberra has been to firstly honour and respect the sacrifices made by the 100,000 Australians who died so we don't have to rally in our own country. That's been right at the top of my list. I believe that we have given away rights that they died for smashed avo on toast and a cappuccino, and it really hurts. And I want to resurrect that spirit as one of the spirits we need to bring back into Australia. The other thing was I saw a constant misrepresentation of the people at the rallies by legacy media as fringe-dwelling neo-Nazis and radicals. And I thought that's misrepresenting the average mums and dads, Christians, Muslims, it doesn't matter, people who've lost their jobs, who are attending the rallies, jabbed or unjabbed, it doesn't matter. It's filled with all these different people. So I thought, how can I bring the narrative back to the people of Australia who just watch legacy media, to get them to see that these groups are not as they're being portrayed. These are everyday mums and dads. And I thought the best way to do that was to link arms with a couple of the other guys, like John Larter, who's a wonderful Christian, very credible paramedic. If a 25-year veteran of paramedicine and a 32-year command veteran with an airline can stand together and get some mainstream media time to get across the narrative that, hang on, maybe these people aren't all nut jobs, then we were going to do a lot better for the movement or the community in the eyes of the public to get some more traction, because that's what we need, is traction. And the other thing has been to try and inject a hope that comes from faith in Jesus at the rallies. I haven't backed away from that. I've copped some criticism for it, but I don't care. To do that and to build a community of people of a like mind who don't feel alone anymore, to see them at the rallies, they're just filled with love. The mainstream won't show that. They'll show the anger. But the joy in the faces, when you stand on a soundstage in front of a couple of 100,000 people and you pray and you say amen, and you hear a couple of 100,000 say amen back at you, and you see the joy in their faces, that's why I'm there. I'm there for that, and I'm there for them, and I'm there to help bring Australia back to a place where we can start being a community again. They're the main reasons I'm there.
Now, John, Graham, I think it's really interesting that a couple of comments that you've made and others have observed, we'd like to caricature it and say the mainstream media are kind of totally against this stuff, the police are totally against this stuff, we're all good, they're all bad, or however we want to put people into groups. But the reality is so much more interesting than that. One of the comments you made at one stage was that a certain police officer, I think his name was Nathan, was actually really doing his best to take care of you in a situation where he could see that you could be in a spot of danger. It was kind of obvious that he had his own thoughts. Maybe he was doing his job because that is his job. You also mentioned a morning television presenter who's a bit of a closet anti-vaxxer, despite what he's doing face onto the camera. So it seems to me that there's a lot of complexity hiding in this. Australia is not that simple, caricatured, shoving a bunch of people into a bunch of groups and just figuring it that way. It's not. We're all human beings. We're all wrestling this stuff through. We've all had the same 2 years. There's been a bit of variety in how we've dealt with it. But there is a real sense that we're all in this together. But we're very, very challenged by the way things are set up.
Yeah, we are, because when fear enters the narrative, people run to their darkest corner in their soul. I believe they do. False evidence appearing real, the acronym for fear. And that fear generates a particular kind of response which can easily be overtaken by evil. So it's vitally important that we understand that the police are citizens in a uniform. That I've said to a lot of police, what we're doing here, we're doing for you as well, and a lot of them resonated with it. I've had great relationships with the men and women in blue at the rallies. Really, really good. I've gone out of my way to make sure that I do. The rallies.
They gave Wendy a sausage for lunch.
They did.
Did they?
Yeah, they did. That's a story in itself. But I was very hungry and I was trying to get across, and there were all these police there. They had a sausage sizzle, and so I as I walked past, I just made this off the cuff comment saying, "That smells so good." And I'd actually been in Parliament all morning, but I was wanting to get across to the rally and just walk myself through and immerse myself. And he said, "Go and get a sausage." I said, "Oh no, I couldn't. You know, I'm not in uniform." He said, "Just tell them that you're undercover." So
There you go.
I actually did. I went over and I said to the woman behind the sausages, "I need a sausage. I'm undercover, but I can't tell you that I'm undercover because I'm undercover." And she just gave me this big smile and she handed me a piece of bread and I had a sausage. It was very good. So I back you up. The police were wanting to do what they could. They obviously were concerned because there was, like the day that I was there, we're talking that the grass was packed. And Graham, it wasn't just the anti-mandate people, the people there worried about mandates. Extinction Rebellion were there. There was also a refugee
That was beautiful.
protest. Yeah,
That was beautiful.
Yeah, it was democracy in action. That is for sure.
It was, and everybody got on so well. We all supported each other. The different groups supported each other, and later on in the day, and not putting a negative on this at all, but Malcolm Roberts came out to speak to the crowd assembled after we'd come out of Parliament, and he was doing his political spiel as politicians do, and the stage was taken over by somebody who grabbed the microphone and went off about, we're coming for the politicians and we need to cordon this joint off and blow it up, and the narrative was so harshly, I thought, was seditious, and I found myself on a soundstage with this man venting his spleen. We were surrounded by police who were hearing it. Malcolm Roberts was standing there looking at me like, what's going on? And in the end, when the mic was relinquished and I got it back, I went off my tree. I actually went nuts, and I said, I am not here to represent any kind of language like that. I will not stand for it. And if that's what this crowd is about, I'm getting in the ute and I'm driving home. I had to really forcibly say that to get the narrative back on track. And that's what I say about the nest of vipers. It's not meaning that those people are snakes. What I'm saying is that there's so much anger and resentment in there that sometimes that spills out in a way that's not helpful to anybody.
No, because as I walked through the crowd, the majority of people were, I think, more than half were mums and dads with children. They had picnic rugs out. I spoke to them. They spoke back to me. But every now and then, I would come across a sign that had been written on one of the walls or something, or even chalk on the footpath, and they were really awful messages, particularly about our Prime Minister, and I just felt, oh wow, that's so sad that people would go that far.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of stuff around. There's a lot of anger around
Yep.
around that. I know there is. There's a lot of talk about things like suppression orders. Now, you know, a lot of people need to get that into perspective. In the work we do, Michelle and I, with our Mission Serenity project and working with the victims of abuse, the stats are that one in three boys and 1 in 4 girls have been sexually abused in their childhood in Australia.
Awful. Awful.
So we're talking about 7 million people. So 7 million people in Australia feel unheard, feel that they've been mistreated by government, they've been mistreated by law enforcement, they've been mistreated by the legal profession. And here we are in Australia where that pain is still very close to the surface. And I, for one, forgive people for wanting to have issues resolved. I think there are ways and means of going about that. I also know that there have been things said about other people as verbatim that I know aren't true. There are things being said about me, for example, that I'm a member of a secret society. And that the same people who say that also say that about other people. And so, because I know that I'm not, how can I trust the information about the other people they're talking about? So we need to be very careful about what we attach our fervour to. There is a process of law that has to be undertaken. But I know, as you guys know, that sin thrives when people keep secrets. And sin in government thrives when governments keep secrets from its people. And I think we need to recognise that that's true. That has to be dealt with at some time in the future. But right now, what that refers to is a past. Sure, there are things still going on. I mean, when you listen to Brittany Higgins about what goes on in Parliament, you have to ask, why are these things going on and why are they continuing? But for me, my main concern about the protection of children right now is getting these mandates finished with, because the suicide rate amongst children is going through the roof. It won't be recognised by government agencies, but I know one young man in particular who has lost 8 friends in the last 6 months, 8 teenagers to suicide, 5 in Victoria and 3 in New South Wales. The rates are going through the roof. We are looking at people being forced to jab their kids in the near future to continue their education. And when we have doubts as adults, why are we allowing this to happen to our kids when they're not at risk? So these are the things that concern me. Child safety is of paramount importance, and that is the primary focus for me at the moment, whilst I recognise what's going on in the other circle.
Yeah, you've had 5 points that you've been pushing pretty hard, if I've not misunderstood, Graham. You've been, and I don't think this is you individually, but sort of broadly the sort of voices that you represent. Open up on borders internally, no more mandates, no more masks, people get their jobs back and hands off kids. Is that a decent summary?
That's pretty much a decent summary.
I mean, as the ACL, I can just, from editorial moment, just to clarify, as the ACL, we're not formally opposed to the vaccine rollout. We are not a medical lobby group. We're not going to give you an opinion on that. You're going to have to do your own research. But where it sticks for us, and I think we share this very much with you, Graham, where it sticks for us is in this issue of mandates, it's in this issue of coercion, and it's in any expressions of government overreach. And we've done our best to sort of find that line between those two positions. And I think just helping people, to help people to understand that. Now, as far as your heart is concerned, you've said 2 things that have stuck out on me. One of them is that you don't want to live in a segregated society. I've been calling it a sort of a medical apartheid.
Yep.
And you've also said this many, many times, and I think this reflects the ministry that you and Michelle have, as well as your own heart. People in despair are not alone. I think you said at one point you really ended up in Canberra because you wanted to reach people who were despairing and to sort of help their eyes to open up to understand that there's a community out there, that there is that spirit of the 50s, I guess the spirit of the diggers maybe as well, that you were talking about. Now, you had a moment there where you stared down the Channel 10 camera and you said a few things to ScoMo. What did you really want our Prime Minister to hear?
Now, I've stared down a few cameras. I can't remember what I actually said that day. Give me a hint.
I'll give you a hint. You need to do something very special to turn this around, is what you said to him.
Yes.
What did you want him to do?
Show leadership. I mean, I refer to Prime Minister Morrison as Pontius Pilate. He just sits back smiling and washes his hands of everything that's going on. Now, he's happy to say, we don't mandate things in Australia, we don't mandate vaccines, but I'm happy quietly to let the states and the corporations do it. But we don't, But you know what? The people, we are still a federation. I'm an Australian, not a New South Welshman, Victorian or Queenslander. I'm an Australian. And the state premiers are rogue, running a state of origin game between the states on who's managing COVID best. A lot of them are wearing superhero costumes under their suits. Their egos are writing cheques that they morally can't cash. And we need a Prime Minister who's going to say enough is enough. Now, we have got to stick to the Constitution. We've got to protect the internal borders of our country. They must never restrict free access by Australians to their families and for the conduct of business. He needs to show leadership. Now, something special for me would be a press conference where he says, we got caught unawares by this, and we have realised that we have done some things that haven't been productive. In fact, we realised that some of the things we implemented were destructive. And for that we apologise, and for that we are going to work with the Australian people to rebuild this country in a very special way. That would show leadership. If I were Prime Minister, I would be making that statement, and I'd be making it loud and clear, and I'd be making it loud and clear in such a way that people living under the rogue premiers would say to their premiers, you know what he's saying is right. But he's continuing to wash his hands of it. And his lack of leadership, sadly, has been so pronounced that it's going to take something special to turn it round. In fact, he doesn't have time between now and the next election to do it. He won't be the next Prime Minister. I'm pretty sure he realises that. And he needs to come clean on a lot of issues. He needs to put things right with the Australian people.
One of the things that we really have been encouraging our people to do through the whole COVID time is to really go back to the scriptures and look, what do the scriptures actually say to us in a time like this? Because, as you just said, Graham, it's unprecedented. This has caught everybody unawares. So, firstly, pray. Really pray for our leaders. God tells us we've got to pray for them.
Yeah.
Do what they say to a certain degree until it actually goes against what God tells you to do. So, if there's reasonable requests, but we really, through this time, I think it's become more and more obvious and more urgent for people of faith in our nation to actually participate in the political process, to get in there and actually speak truth into the public spaces. Because when that void of truth happens, we hear all the other voices coming in. And even some of your examples of other people jumping up on stage and grabbing the microphone and speaking, spewing hate. When there is any silence or there's a void, somebody will always try and fill that void. And so I think for too long, churches and Christians have actually left a void in that public space. And so we've been encouraging them, get back into that public space, get back in and speak truth, because that's what God calls us to do. And he actually says that he's really saddened and dismayed when his people are not speaking truth in the public space.
Absolutely. And a lot of people have said to me, you have no role participating in a protest, but we've got to remember that some of the greatest examples were Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego and Daniel, the prophet Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar made it very clear that they had to follow his mandates, and they refused to, and they didn't hide the fact that they weren't going to do it, and God protected them. And we all need at this time in our history to dare to be Daniel. We need to be Daniels, because we are in the time of revelation. We are in a time where God tells us that, the evil is just, the battle between good and evil is going to get so intense that God's people are just going to have faith in God. They're going to have to be justified by their faith in him. They're going to have the testimony of Jesus and keep the laws of God. The first 4, which are, of course, honouring God, and the last 6, which are honouring their fellow man. And Jesus was asked, which of the 2 laws are the most important? He said, well, there only are 2. Love the Lord your God with all your mind, all your heart, and all your strength, and love your neighbour as you love yourself. The first 4 commandments relate to loving God. The second 6 relate to loving man. So when we do that, We actually fulfill the law of God. And if we do that in the testimony of Jesus, we are in a place of great hope. So there will always be injustice in the world. And I said at the rally in Canberra that Saturday, I said that a lot of people are unhappy because there's injustice that may never be sorted. But one day there'll be a white cloud from the east, and Jesus will be on that cloud with a sword, and he will sort it out. He will clean this place up, and he will take his people home. That's the only hope that I have. The only faith I have in government is the heavenly government, and I want to work as tirelessly as I can with all those people around me to help people see that faith in the real character of God, not the corporate religious character of God, but in the real character of God, as we see in 1 Corinthians 13, as we see in the Beatitudes, the recipe for living a good life, makes keeping Exodus 20 and the laws of God, the Ten Commandments, so easy to do, because everything is based on love. Everything is based on compassion. And if we do that in this country, we don't have to rally. We don't have to get angry.
But over many...
It's interesting, Graham, you talked about... Sorry, go on, Wendy.
I was just going to say, over many decades, or hundreds and hundreds of years, Christians have influenced government for good. And so we're really urging our people to do that when it comes to the upcoming election. Really know who you're voting for, know what they believe, because we want to influence government for good. Sorry, Alister, I cut across you.
No, that's fine, Wendy. I was just going to say there is a yes to your point, and there's, going back to Daniel, sometimes we pray of governments, we say, Lord, improve them or remove them. But I think sometimes there's sort of a deeper clarity which we need, which is that sometimes, like Daniel, it serves God's purposes to have a Babylon for a season. And sometimes that's what God calls us to. He calls us to faithful endurance, faithful witness in conditions that are not to our liking, but they cause a stirring, they cause a shaking. Yeah, that's right. Babylon sorts out the wheat from the chaff, right?
Yeah, it does.
And but
it was certainly to the people of Babylon that Jeremiah said, "Seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you, and pray to the Lord for it on its behalf, because in its welfare you'll find your welfare." So we're to actively seek the welfare of the city where God has placed us, and that was the message to the people in Babylon.
But we're also coming to a stage where we're going to have to come out of Babylon, and I say this to people to put it in a practical Christian sense. I try to preach a practical Christianity, or not preach, speak to a practical Christianity. For example, if you're really upset about sexual trafficking and you're sitting at home watching pornography, you've just invalidated yourself because you're feeding the Babylonian system. If you are against 5G because you think it's sinister and you spend your life watching Netflix, which gives you 5G supports with high-speed streaming, then you're in the Babylonian system and you lose validity about your argument with 5G. So in all things, we have to examine what part are we playing in the Babylonian system. If we support a corporate model of church, which is linked arms with government and become church state, we need to ask ourselves if that's what we want. Are we happy that our corporate churches are making sure people have got a green tick before they come in to see God? I mean, I'm not happy with that. I don't think God wants any restrictions on his people coming together. And so all these things that the state has imposed upon the churches that they continue to do are forcing people to do it elsewhere. So home churches are building and people are meeting in parks and people are having picnics and having their time with God in that way. And those things are good because there's going to come a time when persecution will come upon churches and they're going to have to be guerrilla churches. They're going to have to be small groups as they are in China and other countries. So all these things are good. They're helping to prepare us for what we need to be ready for and to understand. I think coming out of Babylon is an important message, and I think things are sliding so quickly. We're seeing so many laws passed that we would never have dreamt in such a quick space of time. And we're seeing people who stand in their Christian faith being vilified more and more every day. That we have to see that the Babylonian system is starting to really overtake us, and we need to be prepared to get out of it. I think.
That's a good message. No, that's really worth pondering. Graham, I'd love to continue talking, but we are over time by about 5 minutes, which we always try and contain it. But this is a particularly difficult week to contain the clock because it's so interesting. Wendy, any last comments you'd like to make?
No, look, I think I just love talking to someone like Graham. And I love the fact that even with Graham, we can actually have differing opinions on some things, but we are honing each other. It's like that iron on iron, and we can think, okay, let's think this through. And but we're just really appreciated your time today, Graham, and we'll be praying for you too, because I know it has not been an easy time for you and your wife either.
Yeah, we're in a position we didn't actually set for ourselves, but we're there, and we've got to manage it properly.
Yeah,
it's not a place I want to be forever.
If you ever get to be on the front page of the Women's Weekly, I'll definitely buy the issue.
I doubt it.
Such generosity, Wendy.
Yeah.
Graham, you have got great plans for the future. I know that you and your wife have got great things planned for your place up there. So we do wish you all the best. We pray for you. And thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alister and Wendy. Great to be with you. Thanks
God
to
bless
everyone
you.
watching.
Yeah.
God bless you. Bye.
Thank you.